press conference after this, so we had to reorganize the event because of this. So he will just make his introductory remarks and keynote, and we will move to the panel after Ibrahim Kalın's speech. As you know, Ibrahim Kalın is the presidential spokesperson, Ambassador Ibrahim Kalın, and he has been advisor to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan for a long time. And I will give opportunity to our partners, Turkish EU-Turkey Friendship Group and SETA Foundation in the aftermath, because we are in a rush. So it's a pleasure to now host Ibrahim Kalın online. He has been involved in another important diplomatic talk today. So I'm leaving to the talk to Ibrahim Kalın. So, okay. Okay. After introduction of Ibrahim Kalın, we will host Burhanettin Duran and Richard Zaneski, and after that we will close the online part of our panel, then move to panel. All the panel will be online accessible, so we can also take some questions. So Ambassador Kalın.
Talha, merhaba. Hello. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So I want to say hi to everyone from Jerusalem, this most sacred and beautiful city where the three Abrahamic religions have been living together. And it's a city of great spirituality, but has its own difficulties and complications also. But we very much hope that whatever political differences, issues that exist here will be resolved in a peaceful manner with the end of the occupation, of course, the advancement of the two-state solution, and peace and security and prosperity for all, for Palestinians, for Israelis, for everyone here, so that we can enjoy all the spiritual blessings of this remarkable city. But I know our topic today is something else, but I believe it is related because while we celebrate the 70th anniversary of Turkey joining the NATO, the most important military alliance in the last century, moving into this century, into the 21st century, we have to look at the concept of security from a multiple and multidimensional point of view, because security is a multidimensional concept. It's a wide-ranging notion, comes in different forms and many different ways. We cannot reduce security only to military presence. The events of the last 3 decades since the end of the Cold War have shown very clearly an integrated approach to security requires all NATO members to develop new capacities together so that they can develop mutually empowering relationships. And where the security of one member is closely related to the security of the entire alliance, but even beyond that, because making NATO members secure in and of itself will not be sufficient to provide security for all, because we live in an age of interconnected, intertwined dynamics and realities in this late stage of globalization, where everything is related and connected to everything else. Therefore, addressing the security concerns of some members of NATO are important, but never sufficient to provide safety and security for all. But even beyond that, as I said, providing security for NATO or having internal coherence by itself is not sufficient. because we are all faced with constantly changing new challenges in providing security for our citizens, for our countries, for our regions, and for the world overall. Therefore, we have to go beyond military presence for security, but also we have to look at the concept of security from the point of view of global connectedness. And that's, I believe, where NATO will be having a number of important consultations as the alliance prepares for the 2030 vision. And I'll come to that in a minute. I said security cannot be reduced only to military presence, because now the concept of security has become plurified in the sense that we have human security, we have cyber security, we have food security, we have biological security, and a host of other security concerns that make up what we call the security architecture of the 21st century. The COVID-19 pandemic, again, has shown to us how fragile the current world system is, and why we need deeper, wider, and stronger areas of partnership to address concerns and security challenges that we all face. Turkey has been a member of NATO since 1952. Over the last 70 years, Turkey has been one of the most important, leading, and committed members of the alliance. And Turkey's commitment to NATO has been solid throughout this process, and our track record of the last 70 years have included a number of missions around the world, providing safety and security for especially the southern flank of the alliance, but also going beyond that. As the only Muslim member of NATO, we have provided also a bridge to the larger Muslim world, the Arab world, the Caucasus, Central Asia, North Africa, and other parts of the world. We have the second largest and battle-proven armed forces in NATO, and we are among the top 5 contributors to NATO's operations. We are also the 8th largest contributor to NATO in terms of financial contributions. Among others, currently we host NATO's Allied Land Commands in Izmir and one of the 9 High Readiness Force Commands in Istanbul. It's also called the NATO Rapid Deployable Corps Turkey. We have assumed the leading role for the Alliance Very High Readiness Joint Task Force in 2001, and we host one of NATO's 9 High Readiness Force Commands in Istanbul. We make a substantial contribution to NATO's ballistic missile defense system by hosting the early warning radar system in Kurecik. And we also host forward operating bases for AWACS aircraft in Konya. All of this, in addition to all the major missions that Turkey participated in, I think prove beyond any doubt Turkey's solid commitment to NATO alliance. Now we are in a period where NATO of the 2030s is being discussed on the one hand, and comprehensive security challenges are being faced on the other. And Turkey has been a very solid contributor also to the development and implementation of the current security architecture concept accepted by NATO, because of our geography, because of our history, because of our connectedness with North Africa, with Eastern Mediterranean, with Caucasus, with Middle East, Iraq, Iran, and all these other areas, the Black Sea, Aegean, the Mediterranean. Turkey has been an indispensable partner and ally in all of these discussions. And of course, we expect to make a similar contribution to discussions about NATO's future security concept in the upcoming summit to be held later this year in Madrid, Spain. And we, in fact, congratulate Spain for hosting this summit, and we have begun our consultations with our Spanish colleagues and counterparts to make this NATO summit a successful one, especially at a time when the need for the strength of the alliance is clear more than ever, but also we face a number of challenges, of course, most prominently in the Ukrainian crisis at the moment. The Ukrainian issue, in fact, while some may see it as a pressing issue, as a challenge, as a threat to the security of Europe, to relations between Russia and NATO, to Ukraine, to other regional alliances there, but we may also see it as an opportunity if we as NATO allies can exemplify and provide leadership in resolving such conflicts through mechanisms that have been well established within NATO. I think NATO can give a very good example of what we might call preventive diplomacy through deterrence. And engagement with Russia in that regard is important. And we have supported this initiative from the very beginning. Since 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, that mechanism, NATO-Russia Dialogue Forum, has stopped meeting for understandable reason at that time. But I think it is time to resume and start engaging Russia again, and make it very clear, of course, to the Russian side also, that any move that will threaten the alliance's security, safety, and overall perspective on regional issues will not be tolerable, will not be acceptable. But I think what our president has proposed for a solution that is bringing the presidents of Ukraine and Russia together can play a very significant role in resolving this conflict that has now dominated global politics for the last few months. Whatever small steps the two sides, Russians and Ukrainians, may take, I think we have to look at, we have to see this conflict within the larger context of this competing security perspectives of NATO on the one hand, of Russia on the other hand, and of course a number of other players involved. Therefore, supporting the proposal by President Erdogan to bring the Russian and the Ukrainian presidents together should give and bring some new dividends and gains for all NATO allies. Now, in terms of supporting NATO's overall mission for collective defense, crisis management, and cooperative security, we have provided solid contribution to all of these areas. Turkey fully respects allied solidarity in the visibility of security and maintaining unity. From time to time, we have seen some discussions about the integrity or relevance of NATO or its strength by some prominent members, questioning the alliance's strength. These discussions, while if held responsibly, can be very useful. They should not turn into some sort of a discourse to undermine or weaken NATO's integrity, coherence, and ability to deal with pressing issues. As far as overall security is concerned, we as Turkey have been raising the issue of consistency in the fight against terrorism, because we've suffered from lack of consistency when it comes to defeating or fighting against one terrorist organization at the expense of another, or trying to eliminate one terrorist network with the help of another. What I mean is clearly a reference to what's happening in Syria. That is the support by the United States and some other NATO allies, directly or indirectly, to PYD-YPG in Syria. Everybody knows that PYD-YPG in Syria is a branch of PKK, which is listed as a terrorist organization by all NATO allies and the European Union. And supporting the PYD-YPG in the name of fighting Daesh, ISIS, is not only counterproductive, but also it undermines Turkey's relationship with the United States and other allies, but also creates lots of frictions within NATO. And it weakens the overall security concept that we should be strengthening rather than weakening within the NATO context. Because fighting against a terrorist network and leaving that only to one country is not going to help the alliance itself. We have been at the forefront of fighting against terrorism, against Daesh in Syria, in Iraq, and other places, against the PKK in Turkey, in Iran, in Iraq, in Syria, YPG, PYD, Daesh, Al-Qaeda, FETA terrorists, and others. And Turkey is the only NATO ally that has fought and has been fighting against 3 terrorist networks all at the same time. That is against PKK, against Daesh, and against FETA. And this threat to Turkey is not limited to Turkey only, because if one member of the alliance is threatened by terrorism, it affects everyone else. And therefore, the NATO security concept should be united, should be coherent, should be decisive, should be deterrent against all terrorist threats. We continue to approach foreign policy from a 360-degree perspective, where we believe mutually empowering policies are not only possible, but also required and needed. We don't consider foreign policy and security-related issues as a zero-sum game. Engagement in one area doesn't have to come at the expense of another, meaning that the fact that we are a NATO ally doesn't mean that we cannot have strong and serious engagements, say, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in the Eastern Mediterranean, in North Africa, or the Middle East. To the contrary, I think as a strong and respectable member of NATO, Turkey plays a very significant role in all of these areas, and all of those engagements, in fact, help elevate NATO's standing and also strengthen its security architecture. As we look at the last 70 years, and as we look forward, of course, in the years to come, I think the alliance has proven to be very resilient, the strongest alliance, military alliance. But now it's time, of course, to build on this alliance in other areas, as I mentioned, such as human security, cyber security, biological security, food security, and other areas. And to see this concept of security within this enlarged context of interrelated security challenges. Turkey will continue to be a prominent member of the alliance, and will continue to play its role in bringing peace and stability to our region, where our alliance has been very strong. We also will continue to support initiatives in regards to Russia, the Ukrainian crisis, and other issues that require immediate attention from the NATO point of view, but also from regional and global political perspective. And as we look forward to the years to come, as NATO continues to remain relevant and vigilant in the face of the security challenges that we all face, Turkey will continue to be a solid, contributing, robust member of the alliance, with a perspective of 360-degree foreign policy outlook. And I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you briefly from this beautiful city of Jerusalem. I look forward to the discussions. I'm confident that the experts and our other colleagues will have important contributions to make. And I think this discussion in and of itself is a testament to the relevance of NATO in the years to come. And as Turkey, we will continue to play this role as we move forward in the 21st century. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Cullen. It's a great opportunity in the middle of your hectic schedule. You give us some opportunity to also benefit from your experiences and insights. So we are looking forward to host you here physically in the coming terms. But thanks a lot for your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank Ambassador Cullen for giving a thorough background about Turkey's commitment and contributions to NATO, and some insights about the future of NATO. So I would now would like to introduce two partners of this important conference. So, General Director of SETA Foundation, Burhanettin Duran, and founding chairman of EU-Uzbekistan Friendship Group in the EU Parliament and Turkish-EU Friendship Group, Mr. Richard Zaneski. So I would like to also thank Turkish-EU Friendship Group, İpek Tekdemir, for helping me to organize this event. So I would like to give the floor to Burhanettin Duran for a brief introduction, and after that I will give it to Richard Zaneski for a brief introduction. Then we will move to our panel. Professor Duran is also at the same time member of the Advisory Council to Foreign Policy and Security in Turkish Presidency. Professor Duran, please.
Thank you, Talha. We are very thankful to Ambassador Ibrahim Kalın for his illuminating speech, opening speech. And dear Richard Zaneski, distinguished speakers, and our viewers and followers on online and social media platforms, I'd like to welcome you all to this timely event. And I also thank SETA Foundation for organizing this panel on Turkey's 70th anniversary of alliance and partnership in NATO. As we all know, the international system has been under significant transformation since the end of the Cold War. Actually, we are experiencing simultaneous crises all around the world, such as security, economic, and humanitarian and climate crisis. The global pandemics made huge impact over the international system as well. And it is especially common to speak about the return of great power politics and intensification of global and regional geopolitical competitions under the ongoing impact of COVID-19. It is also true that we have many challenges in different layers of international politics. The nature of security is changing, the character of warfare is significantly transformed, and the way in which states respond to these emerging threats and insecurities is also changing. Under the new circumstances and the new dynamics of international politics, NATO, as one of the strongest defense organizations, is trying to prepare itself and its members to overcome all the challenges. And this is NATO's 2030 vision. And this vision is strategically important to attempt to deal with these new challenges. In this context, I'd like to strongly underline that Turkey is militarily and strategically is trying to recalibrate and reposition itself in accordance with the requirements of the NATO 2030 vision. Since becoming a NATO member in 1952, just 3 years after its formation, Turkey has been one of the alliance's biggest contributing partners and making its abilities and capabilities an integral part of the command and force structure of NATO, certainly with its second largest army. And throughout time, Turkey has significantly contributed to NATO's missions like in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo, and Somalia. And it is certain that the geopolitical significance of Turkey is giving high value to Turkey's position in NATO. And you can see this in many explanations made by Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg. Once he said that Turkey is geopolitically important and it is the only NATO ally that borders Iraq and Syria. It is sure that Turkey acts like a stabilizing power all around its surrounding region. And it's also noteworthy that Turkey has been the international frontrunner in the fight against terrorism and one of the key contributors to NATO's efforts to counter international terrorism. Here, by following the steps of Ambassador Kalın, I'd like to emphasize that Turkey is the only country which has fought against Daesh on the ground with its national army by conducting several military operations in Syria. And I'd like to underline that Turkey fulfills its all obligations under NATO membership, and it also seeks support and further collaboration from the organization, from NATO, I mean, and the members, particularly in its fight against terrorist groups such as PKK, YPG, and Daesh. Another issue is speaking of the global migration issue. Turkey has been very effective as NATO member in dealing with the ongoing migrant and refugee crisis by hosting nearly 5 million migrants. Additionally, Turkey is one of the most significant actors within NATO that contributes to the efforts to keep security and stability in the Black Sea. And it is certain that it is very critical under the latest tension between Russia and the West. In recent years, especially after the Brexit, major European countries have started to discuss the future of NATO and talk about a new alliance or a strategic autonomy for the security of Europe. But it is sure that recent escalations between Ukraine and Russia shows that NATO is still important for European security. In this regard, Turkey is supporting unity within NATO and states that all NATO members should fulfill their tasks. As Ambassador Cullen underlined, that Turkey is trying to play a critical role, a stabilizing role in these tensions by proposing to come together Putin and Zaneski in dealing with this issue. Well, I know that we have many distinguished speakers, and here I stop. I'd like to thank panelists and online followers and give the floor to dear Richard Zaneski, Chair of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Duran. So I would like to now give the word to Richard Czarnecki, who is a senior Polish politician and member of the European Parliament from Poland since 2004. He is a member of Law and Justice and part of the European Conservatives and Reformists. He is the founding chair of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group. So he is a strong supporter of stronger EU-Turkey relations, and we would like to also thank his contribution. And I would like to now give the word. Sorry. So I would like to give the word to Richard Czarnecki, who's a senior Polish politician and a member of the European Parliament from Poland since 2004. He is founding chair of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group and a strong supporter of stronger EU-Turkey relations in Brussels. So we would like to thank him for this, and I would like to give floor to Mr. Czarnecki.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much indeed for your very kind words, for your introduction, Mr. President Duran, Your Excellencies, dear guests. Today, as the chair of the European Union Turkey Friendship Group, I'm very happy to contribute to a very timely event organized by SETA. My special thanks go to Tarakoze for his active engagement with European Union. We know that NATO membership contributed to Turkey's political transformation, and today we are here to celebrate Turkey's 70 years of membership of this very important, most important alliance in this century and last century also. The North-Atlantic Treaty Organization and the relationship it holds with its member Turkey could not be understood without an analysis of the security objectives. NATO, representing an alliance of the West, which heavily revolves around the idea of democracy and stability in Europe. A membership position in NATO was the answer to the question whether the United States would help Turkey in case of an attack from the Soviet Union after the end of the World War II. Although there exist different academic debates concerning the extent of the threat Turkey has faced from the Soviet Union after 1945, it could be stated more confidently that its membership position has enabled relief for its foreign policy and security objectives in 1952. The role of Turkey in European security is really important in relations to the international restructuring in the post-9/11 international atmosphere. Since 2005, the start of the accession negotiations created new opportunities for Turkey to shape the overall European security aspirations. The geographical proximity of Turkey to the regional conflicts that are important for the European Union has increased the importance of Turkey. Being the European Union's sixth largest trading partner, Ankara has also proved to be a staunch ally of the West in the area of security and defense within the framework of NATO since 1952. Notably, during the Cold War, Turkey assumed a crucial responsibility on NATO's security architecture and as the defender of the southeastern wing of the alliance, in addition to contributing to several security operations, peacekeeping missions, and efforts toward combating piracy and terrorism in the post-Cold War era. In addition, Turkey is expected to make a substantial contribution to the European energy security following the completion of the Southern Gas Corridor and other potential energy projects. Now is extremely important. These long-standing and strategic ties should be also translated into diplomatic relations between our European Union and Turkey, which have been hampered by recent developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. Both the European Union, EU 27, and Turkey shall seek inclusive and constructive approaches and avoid unilateral steps when dealing with such sensitive issues. While the current global political conjuncture may be conducive to chaotic foreign policy decisions lacking foundation, vision, and coherence, the consequences of isolating a long-term partner and ally should be carefully considered by EU member states, especially given the current developments in the European Union's neighborhood. At the same time, Turkey shall continue to play a bridge role between the East and the West, while contributing to its diversity and respecting its values. Finally speaking, a fruitful and long-term cooperation in the field of migration and security could perhaps give a new impetus for Turkey-European Union relations and to some progress on the accession negotiations, which have been stalled for several years. In fact, security in key area where Turkey is an indissoluble ally for our European Union. Dear guests, excellencies, have a pleasant meeting today, and I'm looking forward to host such also constructive and fruitful debates in the European Parliament, in our House, in the future, in close future, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Zaneski. So your contributions are quite valuable, and you really highlighted the significance of this relationship and the security cooperation and potential for further cooperation. So I would like to really thank you, and looking forward to cooperate further in the future for events like this. So we would like to now move to the regular part of our panel after the online version. So maybe we can give a couple of minutes to re-prepare the stage for our contributors. So, and I would like to also thank very much for very significant contributions of Ambassador Cullen, Professor Duran, and Mr. Zaneski for their highlights. So in our second part of this event, we will host significant experts on Turkey, NATO, and importance of transatlantic security. So are we ready for come? And so we have four very important speakers. We have Amanda Paul, who is a senior policy analyst in Europe in the World Program at the EPC. She has well-established expertise on the issue related to Turkish foreign policy and domestic policy, and her expertise on Ukraine is also very valuable. Nowadays, it's a very important, more important issue, and she's a good friend of us. We will have Professor Çağrı Erhan, who is the rector of Altınbaş University and the faculty member of the Department of International Relations. Dr. Erhan is also member of the Security and Foreign Policy Council of Turkish Presidency. He is writing regularly on daily Turkey and contributing to Turkish TV channels about the contemporary Turkey issues, and he has also, number of publications on Turkish foreign policy, diplomatic history, and we have Dr. Murat Aslan, who is a faculty member of Istanbul Sabahattin Zaim University and a researcher at SETA Foundation. He has a background about War College, and also he was member of Turkish Armed Forces for a long time and worked as a Turkish official and NATO official, and he has extensive experience both in the field, in the academic side of the security, and is a contributor to our research at SETA Foundation on many issues. And he is also contributing regularly to Turkish debates about foreign policy and security. And our fourth speaker is Samuel Doveri Westerbaye, who is the managing director of the European Neighborhood Council, and he received MA in Middle Eastern and Central Asian Security Studies at University of St. Andrews. And main research fields of Westerbaye is economy, trade, energy, and climate and political reform. So his main country of expertise are Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan. So he's also a contributor to the main policy debate. So I would like to welcome, I think I should start with Professor Çağrı Erhan. So he will give a background about Turkey's long contribution to NATO, you know, how this shaped the domestic politics, foreign environment of Turkey. Professor, please, the floor. Nasıl isterseniz. So should we... Herkes geçsin. Okay. So we can host you as a panel. It's Amanda and Murat. Evet.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Kese. Good afternoon, everyone. Ambassador, professors. It's a privilege for me to be here in Brussels after 2 years almost. I was here just a few weeks before the lockdown in February with our president. You know, it was his last, I think, visit in 2020, February 2020, to European institutions. And now, after 2 years, it's our privilege to be with you in SETA with this wonderful audience. As you mentioned, I'm a diplomatic historian, so I know why you gave the floor to me at the first. You want me to speak about the history of what had happened. Yeah, just yesterday night, I was checking the importance of 18 February, what had happened in 18 February 1952, why we gathered here to commemorate the 70th anniversary of what. I remember that it was the day which Turkish parliament ratified the Treaty of Accession of Turkey to NATO. And then I entered the website of Turkish Parliament and checked with the minutes of the session of this voting. Who said what? In 1950, we had elections in Turkey, and the Republican People's Party was replaced by Democratic Party. But in the parliament, there were also members of Republican People's Party and Nation Party, and there were some independent members of the parliament. And of course, all of the groups, political groups, took the stage and said something about the voting. They said something about the NATO alliance and the treaty. And then there was a voting. 410 MPs participated to the voting. 409 said yes to Turkish accession to NATO. 409 said yes. Nobody said no. One said, I'm abstain. So it was almost everyone supported the idea of Turkish participation to NATO. And I checked with the speeches of the group representatives. The speeches were not about what NATO is doing, what is the function of NATO, etc. The speeches were about which party had initiated Turkish and which party was achieved, who achieved to make Turkey a member of NATO. So it was some sort of issue of pride in 1952. Of course, after 7 decades of NATO membership, many things have changed. Many things has changed in Brussels, in NATO members' capitals, and Turkey as well. And of course, many things has changed in terms of the number of members of NATO. Many things has changed in terms of the business of NATO, strategies of NATO. But once more, I leave this, what has changed and the contemporary issues to other panelists. I would like to go back to 70 years ago. Maybe 75 years ago. Why did Turkey decided to become a member of Western Alliance or Atlantic Alliance? There were 3 main reasons, and it goes well before the establishment of Turkish Republic, maybe to early 19th century. All of these three reasons. The first one was the threat perception from the North. With an exception of 20 years between 1925 and 1945, Turkish-Russian relations were always bad. And in 1945, in March 1945, just 2 months before the war has ended in Europe, Russians gave a note to Turkish ambassador in Moscow. They said that they would not renew the non-aggression treaty with Turkey, which means if you do not have a non-aggression treaty, it means one day we can just invade you. I think Ukraine didn't have a non-aggression treaty with Russia. I don't know. And just a few months later, in June, this time Turkish ambassador was summoned to Russian Foreign Ministry Soviet Foreign Ministry that time. And then Russians also asked some modifications in the famous Montreux Convention for the regime of straits, and they asked for some naval bases. And at the same time, some Russian journalists they wrote some columns and asked some territories from Eastern Turkey, particularly the territories which were given back to Turkey after the First World War. And of course, this tolled the bells in Ankara once more, because Russian threat was a concrete threat. Turkey and Russia fought 4 times in 19th century. And with an exception of the Crimea War, Turkey lost all of them with very big territorial losses. And in Crimea War, Turkey was not alone. French, British, and Piedmont, they were with us. The second motivation behind Turkish enthusiasm for NATO membership was the long-term will of modernization. In Turkish, 3 words almost had the same meaning: modernization, westernization, and Europeanization. Starting from the period of Tanzimat, the period of reforms, all Turkish modernists gave references to European countries for creating some institutions or renewing and just reforming the legal system in Turkey, etc. But after the Second World War, of course, the center of Western world was moving from Europe to the United States. So Turkey thought by becoming a member of Atlantic Alliance, this would help Turkey's long course of modernization. It is not a coincidence that Turkey was applying all kinds of European and Western institutions that time. Turkey became one of the earliest members of Council of Europe in 1949, in May 1949. It's not the founding member, it's a wrong information. But it's one of the earliest members of Council of Europe. Turkey became one of the founding members of Organization of European Economic Cooperation, which was created for the distribution of Marshall Plan economic aid from Europe. So all kinds of European institutions and Atlantic institutions was important for Turkey. And the third one is, of course, the modernization of Turkish military. The Second World War proved that Turkish military was not capable to cope with any kind of threat from modern armies of Europe, particularly threat from Russia, not be coped with a military structure dependent highly on the infantry and cavalry. You know, the latest cavalry attack of the Polish cavalry against German panzers resulted with a disaster for Polish army. They fought heroically, but unfortunately they lost. Therefore, this was another motivation. in June 1948, after the Vandenberg Resolution was accepted in United States Senate, US started to make diplomatic maneuvers to create a new kind of alliance. You know, Vandenberg Resolution, I would not repeat it. It is something killing this isolationism and the Monroe Doctrine, you know. Now, after Vandenberg Resolution, United States was allowed to enter military alliances with Europeans. Until 1945, it was prohibited constitutionally. Therefore, US started to make diplomatic discussions with Brussels Pact countries, which created Brussels Pact in March 1948, Britain, France, and Benelux countries. And US Secretary of State was talking about an Atlantic alliance. However, Turkish ambassador in Washington visited Department of State and asked the possibility of inclusion of Turkey to the Atlantic alliance. Therefore, it is not 1952, but it was as early as fall of 1948, 6 months before the creation of NATO. Turkey asked to become a member to the alliance, but it was kindly rejected because if you look at the name, it was an Atlantic Pact, so Turkey should go and become a member of Mediterranean alliance with Britain, Italy, and many other countries. However, just 1 month later, just 1 month after Turkish ambassadors meeting with Secretary of State, Italy was invited to NATO. Because in fall 1948, you know it very well, there was an election in Italy and Communist Party became second. It was a huge problem because it was after French Communist Party became second in French elections in 1947. Now communism was on rise. And of course, Americans said, okay, we should do something. They invited Italy to so-called Atlantic Pact. Then Turkish ambassador once more visited Department of State and said, okay, you told us that it was Atlantic Pact, but now you are inviting Italy. It's a Mediterranean country. You should also include us. They said, okay, but it is something different. We don't understand what was different, but they didn't ask us to come and become a founding member of NATO. But Turkey did everything possible to become a founding member. Just a few minutes ago, we listened to Ambassador Ibrahim Kalın from Jerusalem. And we all witnessed a historical moment because it was after almost 12 years, first time this high-level official from Turkey visited Jerusalem. He was also accompanied by Assistant Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey as well. It was important for us. But do you know there is a role of Israel in Turkey-NATO relations or in Turkish history of NATO with NATO? Turkey recognized Israel, de facto, recognized Israel in March 1949. Just 2 days before, Turkish foreign minister's first official visit to United States, asking to become a founding member to NATO. Because Turkish foreign ministry thought if they would have recognized Israel, Jewish lobby in Washington and New York would make a pressure to American government to allow Turkey to in NATO. However, they didn't accept Turkey to become a member, but it worked for economic assistance. Yes, they gave some more credits with low interest. And 1 month later, you know, in April, the famous North Atlantic Treaty was signed in Washington and NATO established. But Turkey did not quit for its insistence. In May, and by the 11th of May 1950, 3 days before the general elections in Turkey, the government of People's Republic of Republican People's Party, they officially applied for a membership to NATO. So it was not Democratic Party, but it was RPP who officially applied to become a NATO member just 3 days before the elections in which Democratic Party would come to power. But it was rejected. Then Democratic Party came to power. Just on their 45th day in power, North Korean troops passed 38 parallel on the peninsula, and they started war with South Korea. The famous Korean War erupted, the first military confrontation of the Cold War. Then Turkey immediately decided to send troops to Korea in July 1950. 15 days later, Turkey applied officially second time to NATO membership. It was rejected again. But just 1 year later, in fall 1951, September 1951, United States and all other NATO countries invited Turkey and Greece to become a member to NATO. So what has changed? In 1950, Turkey applied twice to NATO and rejected. Just 1 year later, this time, United States invited Turkey and Greece to become a NATO member. When you look at the Turkish foreign policy books, which was written in 1960s, 70s, 80s, always the same story is repeated. Turkish troops in Korea fought very bravely. They assisted US troops in many occasions, particularly in Kunri War. And because of their heroism and their capability to fight, United States decided to invite Turkey to become a NATO member. It's a reality. Turkish troops fought really very bravely. And Turkey is the second country after the United States in terms of death and injured soldiers in this war. But it was not the essential reason for Turkish invitation to NATO. What really changed was that Soviet Union had invented atomic bomb. They announced in late 1949 that they invented the atomic bomb and they have a capacity of nuclear weapons. And after this, of course, the United States felt itself with NATO allies to develop new strategies to stop Russian aggression. Because before the Soviet Union announced their capacity of nuclear weaponry, the NATO strategy, the first NATO strategy, which was called limited war, was depending on that a conventional confrontation would occur on German territory, and American supremacy of air force and deterrence of nuclear weaponry would stop Russian aggression. But now the scenario was changed. Therefore, the need for bases very close to Russian territory was imminent. And Turkey, with its huge land in the south of Russia, would be, in quotation marks, unthinkable aircraft carrier to be used both for second strikes against Russia and for all kinds of surveillance activities. When American military missions visited Ankara and asked for a land, Adana airfield, today's Incirlik, to be used against Soviet Union, Turkey said, in principle, okay. However, we have one precondition. If you take us to NATO, then we will give it to you. Because otherwise, Turkish officials underlined that Turkey would become an open target for Russia. Second time, Americans were replied in the same way. Third time, the same way. But at the same time, and I will finish in 3 minutes. History is enough, I know. But at the same time, Turkish diplomats were also making very important diplomatic maneuvers in Brussels and in Paris as well. In Washington and Paris, no Brussels. Nobody was caring about Brussels. It was Paris, you know. after French was just left in 1966, then headquarters was moved here. In 1939, I'm going back. In 1939, Turkey signed a very important military alliance with Britain and France. Just 2 months before the eruption of the Second World War. We call it tripartite military alliance between Turkey, Britain, and France. And it was a mutual military assistance pact. If anyone would attack to Turkey, Britain and France would come to help militarily. If the war goes to the Mediterranean, then Turkey would enter the war. After the Second World War, Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just before the official establishment of NATO, sent a note to Britain and France and asked them whether this agreement or this treaty, this pact, was still valid or not. They said, of course. We did not nullify it. It's there. Turks said, okay, very well. We also for them. Then we went to Americans and said, okay, whether you take us or not to NATO, we have a military alliance with Britain and France. If Russians attack us, then France and Britain will come to defend us, and they are NATO members. If Russians attack to France and Britain, then according to NATO fifth article, then you have to defend them. If you look at the Department of State archival document in Foreign Relations of the United States, which is open to everyone in internet, it is very, very interesting that Department of State high-level legal advisors were very busy almost for 2 weeks whether this document is valid or not. They made meetings and meetings then they prepared a report for the minister himself and said, sir, Turks have an agreement with Britain and France, and it is valid, and it's a mutual pact agreement. So after this, Turkey was invited to NATO, and as I mentioned at the beginning, nobody in Turkish parliament was against it. And after this voting, which anonymously approved the agreement, all Turkish parliamentarians in the Turkish Grand National Assembly raised and stood for 2 minutes in silence to send their respect for the martyrs who were killed in Korea. So thank you for your invitation. It was very nice to be with you here.
Thank you very much, Professor Erhan. Really, we know lots of things about Turkey's membership, and after the events, things get polarized, discussed, but we really didn't know much about the intricacy of this process. As our introductory speakers also mentioned, there was a very strong commitment after, I think, Turkey's membership. But as it seems, it was quite a difficult process at that time. But interestingly, like in the case of, it's Turkey's acceptance in NATO, it's not actually mainly debated issue in Turkish politics. Mainstream parties usually never opened the debate about NATO, so still continue. Of course, there were some repercussions, but I think this is an agreed upon issue in Turkish politics as well. So thank you for this background. Probably we will have some questions in the aftermath of the panel. But I'm now gonna give the floor to Amanda. I mean, her areas of expertise are quite relevant today, and also, in Turkish NATO, Turkish EU relations, as well as the recent Ukrainian crisis and how NATO is still relevant, and what changed in NATO's significance in Transatlantic alliance. I think she will have more opportunities to reflect on this, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. First of all, this presentation was amazing, actually. I've never heard that history before. So yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to try and be quite short because there was already quite a lot of comments made, but I'm going to focus a bit on the Black Sea and NATO. But first of all, I mean, I want to perhaps repeat something that was said at the beginning by Ibrahim Kalin, and that's about how NATO has evolved since it was created, and since Turkey joined all those years ago, and why the upcoming summit in Madrid is so important, because this new strategic concept is really going to underline, I think, the new security challenges that we are faced with today, and how they're going to be met. Obviously, the traditional security challenges still exist, probably much more than what we would like them to be, namely the Russians. But the other areas that were mentioned, cybersecurity, climate change, terrorism, then, of course, the big elephant in the room, even bigger than the Russians, the Chinese. This is going to be at the heart of these discussions. Will NATO go, out of area, as they say? One never knows. I doubt it, but it's still something that's going to be discussed. And obviously, Turkey is going to be playing a key role in these debates and discussions, because all member states need to be committed to what comes out at the end. But I just want to say a few words about Turkey and its already long history in NATO. I mean, first of all, I would say that despite sometimes what we read in the media, there should be no question over the fact that Turkey has been a really valuable member of NATO, and also very active, I mean, since the day it joined. And I don't just mean its contributions, but I mean, if you ever go up to NATO headquarters, you can see that Turks are engaged everywhere. They initiate things, they're holding receptions. They really are very active, much more than other member states. Also, very importantly, is Turkey pays. I mean, it pays the money that it's supposed to pay into the defense budget. And there's only a handful of member states that actually do that. Turkey is also unique because of its geography. As we know, it offers the alliance a very important operational outreach into the Middle East and beyond, which would be impossible to have from any other member state. And it also has really important historical and cultural ties to different regions, which other member states don't have. But which brings, I think, really added value to NATO's table. I mean, there's some countries where, you know, NATO might go, where a Turkish military officer or other personnel is going to be trusted more than somebody from the United States or Poland or whatnot. So I say that Turkey is really deeply embedded in the alliance. As we heard, it hosts key NATO assets, and it is one of the biggest contributors to the alliance's missions and activities around the world. And it is really around the world because it's from the Baltics to the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. And this has included, you know, a very big engagement in Afghanistan, because some countries actually went and left, but Turkey was in Afghanistan in many different capacities right from the beginning. I mean, it was one of the biggest actors there, and even didn't want to leave. So I think Turkey played one of a major role in Afghanistan. It's also been, you know, key in training the military forces of different countries around the world. I mean, I work with a lot of Eastern Partnership countries, and in literally all of those, it's the Turkish military, together with the United States and some others, that have been training their militaries. And this is, again, you know, a skill that the Turkish military is a highly skilled, you know, and large contingent. And Turkey has also, I could say, never shied away from taking dangerous missions. You know, any part of the world, you know, they're ready to go, perhaps where some other countries perhaps would be more shy. I want to say a few words now about European security, because I think that Turkey has played a key role in shoring up European security, and it's always viewed greater stability in that part of the world as a priority. And a key area where Turkey has contributed to this has actually been in the Western Balkans. Turkey is still involved in this NATO KFOR mission in Kosovo and also in Bosnia. It's also a part of the Baltic policing mission, you know, up north. So it is playing a key role there. And Turkey is actually quite uniquely placed in the Western Balkans because it's one of those regions where there are important, you know, historical and cultural links. Turkey is actually one of the countries that backs further NATO enlargement, because we didn't hear about that yet, but Turkey strongly and vocally actually supports Georgia's membership of NATO and Ukraine's, and calls for, you know, NATO to meet the commitments that it made in 2008. And there's not actually very many countries that do that, particularly not now. And just getting sort of to the end here, because I know there's two other people. I think it's really important here, you know, to underline that Turkey has stood, you know, shoulder to shoulder with the rest of the NATO alliance during this ongoing crisis in Ukraine. This is important. It's also one of only a handful of countries or NATO members that's provided Ukraine with, you know, important military support to help defend itself against Russian aggression. I mean, today NATO defense ministers more or less agreed to deploy these battle groups, these new battle groups, to different members. And, you know, Turkey's also part of these discussions. It's supported that. And Turkey has, you know, very developed now relations, economic, political, and defense cooperation with Kiev, which is really important for the country. And this is done at the same time, while it has this, what I would class as a very multifaceted relationship with Russia. But I think that Turkey is very well aware of the limitations of this relationship with Russia. But that said, you know, I think we need to understand that this is a very careful balancing act, which makes the commitments that Turkey has made, I think anyway, towards Ukraine and Black Sea security, both in and out of the NATO framework, as really important. Because, I mean, frankly speaking, the growing military presence of Russia in this Black Sea region, particularly following the annexation and illegal occupation of Crimea in 2014, I mean, this changed the balance in the Black Sea in terms of the military presence and whatnot. And this is something that Turkey had always tried to preserve. But I mean, it increased the security threat in that region, and also for Turkey. I mean, I can imagine that the flows now of Russian naval vessels, particularly recently, that have come in through the Bosphorus Straits into the Black Sea, has been really uncomfortable for Turkey, who has always tried to control this very accurately by the Montreux Convention. But I mean, I think it's put Turkey in a more difficult situation, because if you look at it geopolitically, Turkey is surrounded by Russia in the Black Sea, in the Caucasus, in the Middle East. So I do think that the contribution that they make to Black Sea security in many ways, I mean, let's say the new missions or the new operations in the sea that are done between the littoral states, Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, with the partners, are really important, and this shouldn't be undermined. And my last point, I mean, I think we can all say that it's fair to say there's been, frictions and disagreements within NATO about some of Turkey's decisions with some member states. But I mean, I think that, in a family of this size, I mean, there's 30 of them, right? You should expect some arguments now and then, some disagreements. Obviously, nobody said it yet, but I will. The S-400 issue, I mean, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? It still needs to be resolved. But I think that if you look at the bigger picture, you can see that even though you have these frictions, these member states still get up together and join in common operations. Greece and France and Turkey are in different operations all over the place. So they managed to sort of compartmentalize their differences. So I think when you take the picture as a overall, if we look back over the last 70 years, I think that Turkey's value to NATO and transatlantic security has actually been massive, and will continue to be so in the future. So I will finish there, and sorry if I was too long.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Actually, your emphasis was really important, because the emphasis on Eastern Europe and the Black Sea security, I think Turkey seems more significant when you look at from Black Sea and Eastern Europe in comparison to when you look from Brussels and Washington, D.C. I think that component is very important, and in the crisis like this one, this point is really highlighted. So your emphasis on that point, definitely there are certain minor issues of disagreement, but I think the commitment to that and also potential for that cooperation is very significant. So I'm gonna now turn to my friend Murat Aslan. So he has been both official, academic, as well as think tanker. He knows all aspects of NATO. So I'm also wondering his reflections from all these experiences.
Thank you, Professor. First, thank you for inviting me in here, because it's a really perfect ground to express myself. And I will try to tell not theory, not, strategic words, but a combination of practice, theory, and also the, words. What do they mean? And also, how can we be united for future synergy? That's the important question, especially taking NATO to the epicenter of discussions, and in the meantime, locating Turkey, because we have to also combine this interrelation with EU, because somehow interrelated. When I ask a question in an examination to my students and ask, what is NATO? The usual answer is mostly memorized, collective security organization. And my second question usually pops up like, what is security? Well, they just repeat Latin word, securitas. And later then they say, okay, it's, freedom from concern, secura. Well, what about the contemporary meaning? They usually hesitated to tell or to depict exactly the context, because they can't do it. The security concern of yesterday, mostly not that much prevalent, valid today, unfortunately. And the latest, Russian-Ukraine crisis reminded us that we are in a phase experiencing the Cold War type conflict with the new emerging interpretation of security and conflict. That means we must be prepared both old and new, but new with a really new interpretation of the old. So if you take this reality, we are usually talking about security of not hard concerns, but soft. We are discussing immigration, we are discussing protectionism, we are discussing racism, we are discussing, for instance, any anti-thing like anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anything. That means there's a softening tone, even though they are not soft. They are really threat, they are really concern. Because when you label a type of concept with soft, you say, okay, it's not important. No, they are really important, even more important than the hard concerns. And in this case, we academics started discussing Copenhagen School, for instance, the context of security with deepening and widening meanings. That's correct. But we surpassed it. I mean, now it's a history, even though it's a fact. Why? Because we have new security meanings currently, even though we can't label them in an adequate, contextualization. Because what we are doing scholarly is just to pursue the events first and try to interpret it, and later then go to the conclusion. I mean, we are not in a phase to predict things. That's one important aspect of scholarly working. And I will bind it, no worry about Turkish-NATO relations. Well, if you just count the traumas of the latest decades, well, you can start with the end of the Cold War. Well, it wasn't a trauma for the Western globe, but it was a trauma for the Russians. You should handle it in an intersubjective manner. Second thing, right after this, well, we labeled new types of conflicts like ethical conflicts in Balkans, for instance. And think that NATO labeled, the threat with one single word that nobody could just attribute a meaning in the very beginning. It was ambiguity. What is ambiguity? That means you don't know what will happen tomorrow. Well, you can go forward, 9/11. I was in the United States on 9/11, and I just want to just emphasize that it was really a disaster for the American people. Now, we circulated the word terrorism. Still, after the incident took place in a capital or in New York. Arab Spring. And later then, we witnessed some small-scale conflicts like Syria, like revolutions in most countries. And think that NATO, for some, was the first resort to intervene, or sometimes NATO was the last resort. Well, just because of the nature of the conflict being faced. And, I don't want to mention the interventions to Afghanistan and Iraq. On the other hand, there was a reality in NATO's thinking, and also for the states, it was the cost of the conflict in terms of human, in terms of, economic burdens, or etc. So, after all this journey, not as a history, but as a journey, well, we invented new words. We had low-profile conflicts during the Cold War. Now we are talking about hybrid warfare. We had the term asymmetric warfare during the Cold War and responding it within the mentality of stability operations in NATO thinking. And today we have more. We have proxies, for instance. And think that each transformation introduced a new thinking. Well, now let me bind it to NATO. What about NATO's transformation? Unfortunately, NATO was late in responding all this transformation. That's a clear fact. On the other hand, NATO was quick to shape itself in accordance with the efforts of Allied command transformation. And think that in the new political security environment of today, that means multilateralism, that means the presence of both competition and cooperation in the meantime, or in other words, complexity of actors and events on the ground, like we have witnessed in Syria. Now, member states of NATO tried to shape their security policies first by themselves, later than trying to link it with NATO. And Syria is the best case for this. And now we witnessed what? We witnessed if you forefront state rather than NATO, interests will motivate states to act on their own behalf and later than credit their own solutions rather than the collective one. And that was the danger. That was the danger. So in this picture, we should also locate Turkey to NATO's security. Well, there's one reality for Turkey, and that clarifies the prominence of this country in the eyes of NATO decision-making circles. Turkey is in between 3 regions and 3 seas: Balkans, Caucasus, and the Middle East, Black Sea, Mediterranean, and Aegean Sea. And think that these 3 regions and 3 seas are full of potential crises that NATO cannot step back engaging with them. Libya case, for instance, it's in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and NATO had to intervene by air assets. NATO is in Iraq. NATO is concerned about Black Sea security. NATO is concerned about potential escalation in Bosnia still. That means all these regions and seas are somehow blended with potential conflicts. Well, Turkey is the only country that have a type of foothold in each in terms of demography, in terms of geography, or in terms of intertwined relations with the regional actors in a flexible way. So, I had written a type of small article for a newspaper, and I questioned the validity of geopolitics and geostrategy in the new era. I said, okay, now we are discussing cyberspace, right? That means geopolitics is somehow existing there, but not that much important as we had in the Cold War era. Now, today, geopolitics is back, unfortunately, right after this Russian aggression across the Eastern Europe, not only in Ukraine, because there's a potential. And think that in this environment, Turkish position in NATO decision-making system, in forming up the NATO's capacity in the regions, in these regions, is prominent. But we must be honest. We must reassess the lessons learned of the NATO operations, for instance, Afghanistan. We must discuss the deficiencies in an honest way and also assess the new security environment. And what I believe is that Turkey, as a member of NATO, as a collective security organization, is committed. But we must be aware of these deficiencies. And if you just compare it with the EU, I think I have to emphasize something. Well, EU is a unity, mainly transferring some portions of sovereign rights of the member states, and security is somehow requires a type of coordination, and they have to close their policies between themselves. Is that right? Yes. But there's some important thing that we should remind. Most EU countries are also members of the NATO countries. For instance, a country with dual membership somehow acts as if a pure EU country or as if a pure NATO country. So we have to discuss as a lessons learned from the latest decade. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Murat. So you also highlight the change of strategic concept and how Turkey's significance also changed depending on those transformations and new security challenges. I think in all these stages, Turkey continued to play significant, and it seems that in the coming years, this challenge and centrality will also continue. So thanks for the highlights. I'm gonna now give the floor to Samuel. So last but not the least, so looking forward to hear his insights.
Thank you. Thank you. So first of all, well, on October in 1951 in London, as Professor Erhan mentioned to us before, both Greece and Turkey became signatories to the NATO accession protocol and officially became members in 1952. I think what's quite impactful is to assess this historical period, which we got in elaborate detail from Professor Erhan, with whether that's in any kind of way similar to what's happening today. Is that balance of power and the reason for these two member states to be included relevant to how the balance looks today? And is that relationship contextualized in history of relevance to what we're facing today, both within the deficiencies of NATO's and the potential of NATO, which we see? Turkey was, of course, considered a major asset for many of the reasons which were mentioned before: its unique geography, the fact that the Jupiter missiles could be placed so far into the Anatolian territory that there was a comparative advantage vis-a-vis NATO on the Soviet Union, as well as, of course, things like the population size, the actual square kilometer size of the country, the fact that there was, of course, access to two seas. Whether you look at the Black Sea or the Mediterranean, those were notable advantages, as well as the fact that there were deep harbors, which were also of extreme importance, both in terms of the land route and the maritime route of Turkey. Vice versa, of course, for Turkey, it was extremely beneficial to join NATO because it got technology transfer and improved its army. It has, of course, close fire protection, as well as other advantages, notably the economic advantages and the integration into other international organizations, the OECD and so on. But of course, perhaps the most important in many ways is the Marshall Plan, which basically catapulted a lot of money into Turkey, not as much as some of the other countries, not as much as Greece, but still a very significant amount, I think something like 150 million, which at that time was, of course, a significant portion, and to compare to another country like Portugal, which only received 40 or 50 million. So it was very important in terms of economic modernization for Turkey. And again, here, there's really a line to be drawn to what we're seeing today again, because in the whole discussion about the elephant in the room, which is the S-400s, a big question has been technology transfer over the last decade of negotiations. So here, again, it very much relates to some of the same reasons for why Turkey wanted to be a member back in the 1940s and then becoming one in the 1950s. Other factors which were very important as well were, of course, strategic one and cultural ones. On the cultural side, for anyone who doesn't know Turkey, but I think most do, of course, it was a natural continuation of the reforms which took place in the 1920s and 30s. Joining a Western organization was simply a natural projection of that. On the more, let's say strategic side, what was noticeable about that period was that, of course, with the Second World War, there was a moment of multipolarity, which turns into bipolarity. It's a bit like the musical chairs game, in which, it's fun to play around and have friends with everyone, but then when things are set in stone and there's cemented polarity, then you have to choose sides. And Turkey chooses that side, apparently, in a lot of detail you explain, really wishing to join the Transatlantic organization. Whereas today, what's interesting to draw that parallel is that we come out of the Cold War in the 1990s from bipolarity into unipolarity, which shapes multipolarity in the last decade and a half, let's say. But that multipolarity, according at least to a lot of scholarly estimations on this topic, will not last forever. And a new cement form will be created. Whether that will be exactly what that would look like is difficult indeed to predict. But the most predictions I've come across, at least, has been tripolarity or bipolarity. That means that Turkey again will have to choose in some ways. And finally, another noteworthy also component is that Greece and Turkey simultaneously are let in or exceed the North Atlantic organization. And that's significant for the simple reason that a degree of balance, of course, is found by having a type of protector or even a type of a balancing actor like the United States kind of protect both their securities at once. That's also relevant for today, but it says a lot about perhaps also deficiencies which exist within NATO today, that stability is no longer being kept. Excuse me. Of course, when we talk about NATO and Turkey-NATO relations, it's very important to mention that Turkey, of course, carries a very specific type of burden, a burden to a higher degree compared to many other NATO countries. And I will not elaborate in detail about that because it's been mentioned before. But of course, the simple fact of Turkey's geography, so close to the Middle East and bordering countries like Syria and Iraq, makes it for a much more volatile region as well as a much more difficult task as a NATO member. However, there are notable disagreements which currently exist within NATO today, which have to do with this changing international environment, as well as some members' new priorities in the last decade. These include, of course, Libya, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Greek-Turkish maritime dispute, Cyprus, Syria, and from a more defense procurement perspective, there are, of course, also disagreements over technology transfer, co-production, pricing and purchasing from countries which NATO considers competitors. So here, perhaps it's just interesting to look at three different perspectives on this. For example, the US perspective on the S-400s is very much that there is so much of a common thread within NATO's last communications in Wales and in Brussels that dictates that Russia is a competitor, that it would seem unreasonable for Turkey to then go into an S-400 purchasing agreement with Russia. With regards to Syria, the disagreement is very much like Ambassador Cullen mentioned before, the problem between the distinction of the PKK and the YPJ, which I think by most accounts, of course, are very much one of the same. And that creates an enormous problem with regards to US and Turkey within this problem of distinction. And then thirdly, there's another aspect which is also important, I think, to mention, which has to do with the fact that Turkey is a country that is a net energy importer. And as a result, when Turkey is forced into a position of having to diversify away from traditional energy suppliers, like, for example, Iran, as a result of the withdrawal from the JCPOA of the United States and the inclusion of the sanctions, it basically means that Turkey is put in a very precarious situation, which it has to re-diversify its energy relations, which is a contentious problem because often it will then go to Russia. So this is a bit of an issue which I think is also noteworthy of mentioning. Of course, from the Turkish perspective, as I mentioned before, it had very little choice but to diversify into an energy dependence with Russia as a result. With regards to the YPJ and the PKK, the response of Turkey has often been, look at the Adana Protocol from 1998, which, in all fairness, of course, has a rather legitimate reason that for decades and decades, the northern Syrian region has been used as a form of springboard for terrorism, which creates an enormous problem for Ankara's security concerns. Interestingly also is the Polish and Ukrainian perspective today when we look at NATO and Turkey, which is that, of course, a 270 million euro defense agreement has been signed between Poland and Turkey. Poland has become the first EU country and the first NATO country that has purchased drones from Turkey. And as a result, it places it in a very important position vis-a-vis Russia. With regards to Ukraine, I think two points are also very important to mention. Of course, number one is that there equally is also a defense agreement between two countries in which drones have been sold. But also importantly, from more of an EU and trade perspective, which is that Turkey has signed an extremely important trade agreement with Ukraine, which basically allows for approximately 95% of Ukrainian goods to now go custom-free into Turkey and vice versa. This agreement has been in the progress of negotiation for over 12 years, and as a result, I think will yield extremely significant results. The reality, of course, continues to be that many NATO allies are fundamentally intertwined, especially economically, with Turkey. So it's never really possible to look at Turkey-NATO relations without contextualizing also the relationship that it has bilaterally with other countries within NATO. And notably, I think Germany is perhaps the best example when you look at the economic relation between two countries, the amount of companies that operate within Turkey, and simply the fact that Germany depends in extensive supply chains on Turkey, something which has only been exacerbated since COVID. And also they continue, many of these countries, to depend on Turkey for security, data transfer, migration management, and of course, when we include Poland, as I mentioned before, also for military equipment. And I think also it's important to mention that within the context of the Asia pivot of the United States, it's practically impossible to envision, or at least it's very difficult to imagine, a stable and prosperous Europe without a reasonable relationship between the major actors within the European continent, and that, of course, includes both France and Turkey. So in very, very few points, how one guarantees a strong alliance and a sustainable relationship between, for example, the US and Turkey? Well, the first point is trust and dialogue. The second one is re-engaging the US commitments for Euro-Turkish integration and defense, as opposed to, for example, Russian defense. And here I mentioned, for example, the SAMP-T or other type of defense procurement, which have been negotiated by Italy, France, and Turkey. US recognition of Turkish southern security concerns on its borders, and also US commitment towards Turkish-European energy diversification, either or in Central Asia and Iran. This is, of course, very, very difficult to predict what will happen, but these are two very viable options. One will depend on what happens in negotiations in Vienna, and the other one will depend on a lot of different things, including maritime, or what they can agree on with maritime delimitations in the Caspian, as well as the role of Azerbaijan. When it comes to EU-NATO allies and Turkey, in terms of guaranteeing a strong alliance and a sustainable relationship, of course, the first priority is de-escalation in the East Med. In order to get to that, it's quite complicated, and there's a whole chronology which has to be followed. I just wrote a paper on it, but it takes a lot of time maybe to go through that, so I will send it to you if you wish. And then the second one, of course, and it's very intertwined to this, is a Franco-Turkish rapprochement. There is absolutely no way, in my opinion, and I think according to other people who study this theme, that NATO relations can be successful and prosperous without a strong relationship between France and Turkey. And then, of course, when one says de-escalation East Med, one says French and Turkish relation, one also has to mention EU-Turkey relations. And here it's really like full circle. EU-Turkey relations, in my opinion, will not be repaired multilaterally, and they will not be repaired through an EU process as traditionally done. It will be through bilateral relations. So if there's an improvement there, again, it will come back to the French-Turkish relations again. And as I mentioned also before with the US and Turkey, energy diversification will be key. There are some changes occurring now in the East Med, which are rather interesting. And as we have just seen from Ambassador Cullen, he's in Jerusalem, and the relationship with the UAE and Israel may be game-changing as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samara. You really highlighted important points of tension, some points of further cooperation, as well as some ways to address some of these problem points. So it was full circle of both conflicts, potential problems, potentials for further cooperation, as well as some ways to address those issues, and demonstrated a full circle of issues. So thank you very much. So, we have some maybe 15 to 20 minutes for questions coming from our audience and the social media. So, I think you all made very interesting points, and also the debates that you highlighted are very relevant for today's issues: security of Europe, security of Transatlantic, and the current issue, tensions in the Black Sea region, as well as other parts of the world. And Murat, you also mentioned the coming challenges and new security challenges. Ambassador Cullen also mentioned. So NATO's vision to address those challenges. So if you have questions, I'm gonna get the set of questions. So we have microphone there. Anyone?
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. I'm asking about the possible re-evaluation of some of the strategic concepts of NATO. We all know NATO transformed itself in the post-Cold War years, and it is the most durable alliance of the recent history in terms of the security issues. But we all know, even the panel mentioned about some of the issues of discontent among its members in terms of S-400 or YPG, PKK issues. But now we have a crisis in Ukraine, and in each crisis, then we are expecting international organizations to address these crises and to change, to adapt themselves to answer some of these challenges. What should we expect from NATO in terms of adjusting itself and also making some kind of changes, its strategic concepts? And what is the role of Turkey in this re-evaluation of NATO strategic priorities? What should we expect from NATO in terms of reassessing the strategic priorities? Shall we expect, for example, a much more reliance on traditional security structures? Because recently we witnessed NATO much more operational in some kind of training activities in Iraq, or maybe its activities in Afghanistan. But with the current crisis in Ukraine, are we going back to the old type of threats to NATO countries, and how NATO should respond to this crisis, and what is the role of Turkey here?
Huh? Let's take this one. Yeah. Whoever wants to.
Okay. There is a concrete.
Ses geliyor mu?
There's a concrete document of NATO, NATO 2030. There was a group of experts which was established by Secretary General of NATO recently, and participated by a very prominent Turkish diplomat as well, who used to be an Assistant Secretary General, Ambassador Tajan İldem. Mm-hmm. They prepared a paper for a projective approach for NATO in 2030. And there are some main items for the next strategy of NATO. One of them is, the first of them, is giving reference to more consultative, more cooperative structure of NATO. When you read these pages about under this item, you understand that there's a problem emerging among 30 members of NATO. You know, when it was established, it was just 12, then became 14, 15, 16, etc. Now we have 30 members of NATO, and it's becoming more and more difficult to, and we see in the recent crisis in Ukraine, it's not easy to come together and have real deterrent resolutions within NATO. The second one is about the global cooperation, possible global cooperation of NATO. Now NATO is, at least for 20 years, passing through, both in terms of area and business, a transformation. You know, after 1999 strategy, two new commands were established within NATO. Command for transformation and operation. And this transformation department is also dealing with the possibility of becoming a more security organization and even a global security organization. That's why, in addition to partnership for peace partners, now NATO has also some global partners, from South Korea to Brazil to some countries in Africa, in Asia Pacific, everywhere. So the next 10 years, most probably, will be also a discussion. And we see some evidence for this, for global issues. You know, in the latest NATO strategy, there are clear references for the threat perception from China, for instance. Next to Russia, now we are talking about China. And the third one is NATO is much more trying to become a security organization, not only in terms of hard security, but also in some kinds of humanitarian security. For example, in this NATO 2030 goals, the experts are talking about climate change, global warming, how NATO can be active to stop global warming. I don't know how a defense organization or security organization can be active, but there were some concrete references to, for instance, using less fuel in military vehicles, or making less military maneuvers by real explosives, which gives pollution gases to the atmosphere, etc. So NATO is transforming itself, but I think, if I go to the first sentence of this 2030 document, that the most important thing is to solve the problem of a discussion or consultation in NATO. It is becoming more and more difficult to take decisions in NATO, and there should be some more mechanisms. On the other hand, what was mentioned previously, the different hats on the same heads is becoming more problematic. I mean, EU members, they have EU hat here in human building. When they go to NATO headquarters, they have another hat. So how to cooperate between EU goals, EU security goals, because now EU also have a security agenda, at least since Amsterdam, and with the NATO goals.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Getirebilir misin?
evening events, there are 3 events. You go by not voluntarily that much, going a classical music concert or going to fitness or going to a panel like this, but at the end you become very happy and enlightened. Thank you very much, all of the participants. It was amazing. It was a very fruitful discussion. But I would like to take it from Professor Erhan just mentioned about it. The crack and the crux of all these strategic concepts are also will be shaped how EU strategies and NATO strategies will be compatible. So when NATO preparing 2030 document, EU is preparing strategic compass document. And France, as Samuel mentioned, is also one of the main countries who initiated this paper, which initiated this paper. And when you read the French presidency, I'll also make a reference to what Professor Erhan said. For the presidency, you see Russia, China, Turkey, para, and one sentence about Turkey. If it will go with this understanding, it will also create some cracks in NATO strategy. And strategic compass cannot be some kind of a document or strategy which will be endangering NATO's 2030. This will be the main discussion, because when we have EU-NATO meetings, we discuss about disruptive technologies, Ukraine, Balkans. But if the EU leaders, in their statements during the Slovenia presidency, saying that if we cannot fill the gap in the Balkans, Russia, China, and Turkey will fill the gap. This is not the understanding of NATO. And this head issue, Schuman, and also headquarters of NATO, will be the next determiner of it will be the next critical, benchmark how we will continue in creating good and effective strategies for NATO. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this important highlight. I think this debate will be one of the, issues that, the strategic compass, strategic autonomy issue will be one of the dividing issues in the coming terms, I think. But I wonder, I also would like to ask Samuel and Amanda how this recent crisis in Ukraine will affect the current debate on strategic autonomy. Is it going to be further deepened, or is it going to be abandoned, or how do you think this issue will be affected with the current crisis? As also Mr. Ambassador highlighted, this issue will, if it goes in the regular pace, I think it is likely to generate cracks in the NATO. So what do you think about this?
First of all, just on the strategic compass, I'm not a huge fan of this document, and I fear it may end up on a shelf like many other, such strategy papers, gathering dust. I think it's very much a fantasy to think that the EU is going to become a serious security and defense actor, and it certainly doesn't have the capacity or the support of all of the member states in this way. So maybe I shouldn't say that publicly, but I don't have a huge amount of expectations for the strategic compass, and I'm certainly not the only one, from the expert community. For strategic autonomy, I think it's something that's extremely ambitious. There doesn't seem to be very much meat on the bones for the moment. It's something that's driven by a particular set of member states rather than the EU as a whole. I personally believe strategic autonomy only has a chance of really progressing anywhere if they think about working together in alliances with other countries that are outside of the EU, because including Turkey. Otherwise, I don't think that's also going to make very much progress, and doesn't really have that much political support inside the EU either. Both of these things are driven by our friends in France. That may not be a coincidence, but I mean, let's see. Maybe I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Samuel, do you want to add something on this?
So I think Ambassador's point with regards to the strategic compass and how it can be problematic vis-a-vis NATO is of course correct. And I think the timing of a potential improvement of relations between the EU and Turkey is basically the key here, the timing. So if it takes 5, 7, 8, 10 years, then the situation will deteriorate in exactly the fashion you just mentioned. However, if it's less than that, then there can be ways of overcoming that problem, of course. And here, you know, the question of the election of France and Turkey will be key. If diplomats and also track 2 and track 1.5 diplomacy take seriously this new time period in which research can be conducted, red lines can be discussed on where France and Turkey stand on a range of issues, which I mentioned before, then there's capability, of course, to make sure that that strategic compass and NATO don't clash. Now, whether or not they will clash, that's difficult to say. Who knows? It's a bit of a mystery. But one thing I think we can be structurally sure about is that it's far less likely to go on the what did you say, Amanda? On the shelf now than before Brexit. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's something we can be certain about. With regards to Ukraine, I think within the context of what we just spoke about, I think it's of course important to mention that of course there are different camps with regards to how everyone approaches Ukraine. UK and US take a much more proactive approach. However, it should be mentioned that Biden, last time I checked, mentioned that retaliation would only occur if troops and tanks, I believe he said, cross the border. So that leaves a lot of margin, precisely for the reasons that were mentioned before with regards to this NATO 2030, because hybrid threats are indeed the new type of weaponization in warfare. And as a result, Biden basically said, that's all okay. But, I mean, basically, but only if they really cross the border, which I'm sure Putin or maybe might not, right? So as a result, if every single municipality along the border, you know, Kharkiv, Mariupol, and so forth, are all hacked simultaneously, and maybe the US won't do anything then. I mean, that begs a lot of questions, I think. Just one last thing about Poland and the Baltics, and also about Germany and France. Of course, Germany and France have been, you know, France has visited the Baltic countries more than any other president in history, and at the same time, Germany is now sending a ton of different defense and support of military nature in order precisely to avoid that they feel that they're not protected.
Thank you. So we came to the end of panel, but I would like to get one more question, one last question. So please.
Can we ask 2 questions? Because
okay, just to ask 2, and we'll give the panel to respond.
So my question will be to Mr. Murat Aslan. It's about, like, we know how the world got interdependent regarding financially or energy, and I think that energy security is a rising question, especially during the issue between Ukraine and Russia. We saw how some NATO allies had problems because of this dependence of energy with Russia. And yeah, of course, we also know that the US had some initiatives, for example, liquefied natural gas or other kind of ways to tackle this. I want to ask, what kind of long-term strategy should NATO has in this regard, and what will be the role and or influence of Turkey in this? So thank you.
let's get the other question.
First of all, I would like to thank the participants and also SETA for this valuable event. I'm a political science and international relations student, and that's why I'm curious about the future of NATO. As you know, we are living in a complex and also integrated world, and everything is changing too quickly. That's why there's a short period of time to 2024. As you know, in 2024, maybe Trump may come back to US, and if he comes back, I'm curious about what will happen in terms of NATO, because he might be the one who can pull NATO out from the. I'm sorry, he might be the one who can pull US from the NATO. That's why I'm curious about the audience's ideas about this issue. And I would be very happy if you could evaluate my question in terms of Turkey's perceptions. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for the question. So I'm going to give 1 minute or 1 or 2 minutes to all to complete.
You know, every conflict is both a risk and also an opportunity. In the latest crisis in Ukraine, I think energy has become one of the most concerned headline in the minds of the politicians, mainly in Germany or Central European countries, etc. And also Turkey is also dependent on the energy imported from Russia. But now we have an opportunity in Eastern Mediterranean Sea, and a normalization with Israel will take all these energy resources, be transferred to Europe, and an alternative. I mean, we should think about it twice. On the other hand, there is another reality. Germans invested a lot to Nord Stream, and the Trump's quest was to sell liquefied gas to Europe, pressed a lot during his presidency. And Biden had promised to stop, you know, carbon emission in the United States, even though it was utopic for me. And nowadays, I see no movement from the Biden administration to stop, you know, the production of natural gas in the United States or etc. And it was last year the United States sold liquefied gas to Turkey, actually. So I see this opportunity as brilliant. I mean, we can start projects either coming from Azerbaijan or Turkmenistan, and there's a problem over there, and also integrated with the Israeli and Egyptian gas and transferred. But it needs investment, and it can't be spontaneous. I said there's a problem in Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan. Why? Well, there were incidents in Kazakhstan. We all remember it. It was last month, right? On the other hand, there's one thing. The infrastructure of Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan is heavily linked to Russian gas infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So if Western community, Europe or the United States wants to have a type of new, you know, supplier, I think they should first politically press and also invest in economically.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Amanda, do you want to add?
Yeah, maybe I can add something. I mean, honestly, I think the chances of having an Eastern Mediterranean pipeline now are pretty much zero, because it goes against the EU's commitment to this green transition. So I think it would be extremely difficult to build this pipe now. I mean, that can also have, you know, a good repercussion, right? Because it can help de-escalate in the Eastern Mediterranean. What's more likely is electricity coming from the other side of the Mediterranean underwater, but not a pipeline. I mean, I think realistically in the short term, gas from Azerbaijan or more gas from Azerbaijan is the only realistic option. But again, as was just mentioned, this requires downstream investment. I mean, two commissioners traveled to Baku a couple of weeks ago. But those chaps, they need to speak to the energy giants, to Total, to BP, to ENI, whatnot, to invest in new fields in the Caspian, because the current field, Chardon, is all that gas is already accounted for. But again, this in itself creates, it's not straightforward, because the big multinationals have now also started their transitions to green energy in the percentages of what they actually do. But I mean, I think still in the short term, that would be the most viable option, plus buying more LNG and other sort of spot gas, but definitely not creating new pipelines. I think this is really off the record, which makes a bit of a conundrum. And also, I think this probably makes, whether we like it or not, Nord Stream 2 more likely to come online. And so far, I haven't really seen any indication from the Germans that they're seriously going to, ditch this project. So yes, we do have a bit of a problem here.
Thank you. Çağrı Hocam, do you want to add?
I would like to speak about the future of NATO. Of course, I talked a lot about the past, and now it's time for the future. In 1947, Mr. X sent a long telegram. Mr. X is George Kennan, a member of American mission in Moscow, not the ambassador. Sent a long telegram to Washington Department of State talking about the possibility of Soviet aggression. And he mentioned it is not related with ideology. From the times of Tsars, Russia tries to expand to east westward. So it should be contained. Just a few months later, he published his first article in Foreign Affairs with the, nickname Mr. X. The name of the article was Sources of Soviet Conduct. And he once more defended the idea of containment. And as a result of this containment strategy, which was approved by National Security Council in the United States, the first fruit came not from Europe, but from Latin America. This organization of Latin American states was established. And then 1 year later, in 1949, NATO was established. 5 years later, SEATO was established. Then CENTO was established. ANZUS was established. United States concluded more than 50 defensive agreements in Cold War to contain Soviet Union plus Communist China. There is no Soviet Union. There is no Communist China. There is no communism anymore. The wall fell in 1989. Then NATO tried to find some new causes of existence, raison d'etre. Because otherwise, you don't need NATO, because there's no Soviet threat anymore in 1989. Then they created, in 1991, the strategy created in Rome. In 1999, after the Kosovo operation, they created a new strategy, gave new tasks to NATO, defined some non-Article 5 operations, started to transform NATO into a security organization. And they, throughout 25 years plus adventure of transforming, NATO is now talking about a new threat coming from Russia and China and from cyberspace and everywhere. It is very hard to survive in this manner. All alliances, even the longest one, perished in the history. So NATO will not survive forever. They will not live forever. Because at the end, it will be hard to control and command with 30 allies plus maybe more. And it will be very difficult to conduct operations in a very larger scale. Even the Roman Empire collapsed because of the scale problem. Scale is a very big problem. You cannot conduct operations in a global level if you are NATO. You need more and more members, and more members creates more problems. So at the end, for survival, NATO needs more and more threats. Without more threats, they cannot survive. At the end, I think the solution for security, global security, is not in an alliance like NATO or the Russian-led, what was the alliance? Huh?
Collective.
Yes, we recently heard their name when they invaded Kazakhstan. Yes, maybe China will establish another one. The solution is in the 49th article of Charter of the United Nations. Their Charter of the United Nations, in 1945, when it was first written, was giving reference to a global security command. Okay? All members of the Security Council, plus some other countries, come together and they would create a joint headquarters of staff, military staff, under the umbrella of United Nations. It never happened. It never happened. But maybe we should once more think about it. Of course, this brings us to another problem of reform in the United Nations. Without reform, it is impossible. So we will all see, wait and see what will happen.
Thank you. Samuel, do you want to add?
I'll be very brief. I think logically there's an enormous problem, which is globalization has interconnected us all. And now NATO tries to, I don't know if they try to build threat, but I think they try to respond to threat. Those threats are fundamentally globalized and interconnected, making it very, very difficult to align all members. But that's pretty much the task of NATO. Its success will depend on the degree of alignment it can find in a multitude of different sectors, which go well beyond traditional security, or at least to a reasonable degree. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I would like to thank our panelists for their very valuable contributions. And for both our physical and online audience, it was a long panel, but after a long, we forgot some of our panels. So it's great to see all of you here together. So looking forward to have and host new events. And for the beginning of the panel, I really thank Ambassador Ibrahim Kalın, Professor Burhanettin Duran, and Mr. Richard Zaneski for their valuable contributions. And I would like to also thank İpek Tekdemir for helping us and supporting us and co-organizing this event with EU-Turkey Friendship Group. So I'm hoping that we will have continuous panels, because even in this panel we have seen very interesting points that we need to delve into further. So I would like to also thank our audience for their contributions and for following us. Thank you.